This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
This morning on the show, we are celebrating difference, and we are thinking about how we make sure all of our young people are included in all of our celebrations, which happen at this time of year.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
A very good morning to you. It is Saturday, the 13th of December, 2025. This is the Saturday Breakfast Show here on Teachers Talk Radio with me, your host, Darren Lester. As always, I am thrilled to be having breakfast with you this morning. How have you all been? How has your week been? For me, it's been a good one. It's been quite slow, I must say, which, just so that we're clear, I am not complaining about. This time of year, if you have listened to the show for even 5 minutes in the past, you will know this time of year is my favorite, and I want it to last for as long as possible. So the fact that it does seem like a little while since we were last here together having breakfast is not a problem for me. I am going to be very, very honest. But it's been a good week. It's been a very good week for me. I have taught lots of lessons, which has been fun, I must say. I have not taught a couple of lessons which were scheduled through no fault of mine, but through some of my students oversleeping and missing their lessons. This is something that hadn't occurred to me when I switched to an online school, was the fact that our students are pretty much in control of their own schedules. So the way it works is that my students will get in touch with me, either when they have something they want me to mark or when they personally need a lesson to talk about something in the course that they haven't understood. And we'll arrange a time, and I'll either call them or we'll jump onto our VLE and we'll do a face-to-face lesson that way. There are a few different ways that we do it. And up until now, my students have always been really, really good. They have been ready. Sometimes we'll have to reschedule a lesson, either because they realize that they've double booked themselves, or on the odd occasion, I will be honest, I've realized that I've double booked myself. But that's been quite rare. But I've never had a student outright miss a lesson before, until this week, when I had arranged the lesson with a student. I gave it a couple of tries. I tried calling, I jumped on the VLE, there was no response. So I did the typical safeguarding measure, sent an email, "Are you okay?" I had an email a couple of hours later. She, bless her, she was very apologetic, but she was just like, "I'm really sorry. I took a nap and I slept through my alarms. And so I missed the lesson." And I was like, do you know what? That is okay. That is completely okay, because I feel like in December, afternoon naps are the way to go. So I could not blame her for that at all. But it did make me think about what happens when we give our young people autonomy over their schedule, because for a lot of the time they don't have it. I feel there have been quite a few threads that I've been reading various places on the internet lately about how we, as adults, as the older generations, had a lot more freedom than our children or the children that we teach do. Um, I read something from a teacher the other day that was like, one of my pupils asked whether it was true that we would go out at 9 o'clock in the morning, come home at 9 o'clock at night, and our parents had no idea where we were in that whole time. And the teacher said, well, yeah, that was just how it worked. That was what we did. And the student was shocked by it, by the fact that the parents seemed to not care where their children were. And I'm sure that's not the case, but at least weren't kind of helicoptering and weren't having them check in, weren't, texting to find out where they were. And I think that is something that our young people are missing out on a lot of the time, this ability to try and schedule themselves and then to have to try and rectify it when their schedule goes awry. And that's a life skill because, unless you end up in an unfortunate position where you are in a job underneath a micromanager, and we all know that none of us want those jobs and we don't want our kids to go into them, you're not going to have somebody scheduling every minute for you as an adult. And if you don't learn how to do that for yourself as a young person, where it's kind of safe, because it's not the end of the world if you miss a lesson because you decided to take a nap and you slept through it, because that lesson can be rescheduled. The worst thing that happened was that I was sitting in my office for half an hour trying to get in touch with this pupil, and couldn't. And, while that could have been wasted time, as an adult, I am able to schedule my own time and do a bit of marking kind of in between the attempts to get in touch with her, because, I didn't want to be some kind of stalkery teacher who was having multiple missed calls. And so I kind of feel like it's good sometimes for us to let our young people figure out their schedules, decide what they're doing, decide why they're doing it, when they're doing it, because it is safe for them. It's not the end of the world if something is missed, if something is forgotten, because things can always be rescheduled, they can always be redone. And the whole point of childhood, as far as I'm concerned, is to learn how to do things that you will need to do as an adult, but in an environment where it is safe, in an environment where you should have an automatic safety net of your teachers, of the adults around you, so that you do have those skills when you are older. Now, I understand why kind of Gen X and millennial parents are very helicoptery. We kind of, even though we were given a lot of freedom at home, we went through education where we were starting to be helicoptered by the adults around us. We started to go through education after the national curriculum had come in England and Wales. We went through education where safeguarding started to become a massive priority. And so that's something that I can imagine a lot of parents have kind of taken from their own childhood. The adults they felt safe around, their teachers, they were the ones who were kind of helicoptering and making sure that they were okay. And they have brought that into their own parenting style. There's also the fact that we have millennial anxiety and we don't want people to think that we're bad parents. And the best way to do that is to keep checking in with the kids and making sure that they're safe. And let's be honest, we should be making sure that they are safe. We were, I feel, the last generation who had public service announcements on the TV aimed at us. I don't remember the last time I saw something on TV about, the Green Cross Code, or there were little hedgehogs, weren't there, who had to try and cross the road without getting squashed whilst singing a song that I won't sing so that I don't subject you to that at 9:10 in the morning. But Maybe the reason that I don't see those things is because I don't watch a lot of media aimed at children anymore. Maybe the reasons that I don't see those things is because there are very few children's TV channels still in existence. Um, Tim has texted in, "Good morning to you." Yeah, King of the Road is exactly the song I was thinking of. It's a huge earworm, isn't it? That's going to be going through my head all day. Please do go ahead and sing it though. That is absolutely fine. I know that you quite often listen to the show with your dad, and I'm sure that your dad will be thrilled to hear your rendition of King of the Road. um, but yeah, I've kind of gone off on many tangents now, haven't I? So let's kind of start rounding them up in reverse chronological order. First of all, I'm lamenting the fact that we don't have very many children's TV channels at the moment. I was reading yesterday that Pop and Tiny Pop have kind of gone off of the air, which doesn't leave very many channels on TV. And the reason that was given for them um, coming off air and becoming online services is that there just isn't the money anymore in children's television. They weren't turning a profit. And as much as we would love to think that children's entertainment industries operate on a let's make everybody happy and educated basis, they don't, because they're companies. Um, and so it's very sad to see them shift to an online only platform. But maybe it's a good thing, at least, that they are still online. But we've seen lots of children's TV channels kind of die in the last 5 years and switch to online only methods of transmission, or disappear altogether because the parent company owns a streaming service. So all of the content has moved onto that, which kind of does limit what our children can be exposed to. But yeah, I think that that's sad, and I think because of that, we don't have the same kind of public service announcements that we had as children. But that does explain why we have become helicopter parents, because for us, childhood was quite dangerous. It was fraught with strangers who were going to abduct us, and cars that were going to run us over if we didn't wait for the little green man, and quicksand that we were going to sink into, and the Bermuda Triangle that was always a massive threat when I was younger. And everything was very, very scary when you were a child in the 90s. It was amazing. But yeah, I can then see why modern parents of my generation, don't want their children to be at risk, because we were apparently at risk as children. And that in turn does mean that children very often don't control their own schedules because their parents control it for them. And so they don't learn, how you send an email to apologize when you missed an appointment, or how you don't tactfully realize that you've double booked yourself and propose an alternative time for something. And those are really good life skills. All of the stuff that we're told should be covered in school, because school doesn't equip us for life. Things like, doing taxes, getting a mortgage, all of that stuff that I still maintain you can learn from home. You can learn from other adults. You don't need me as a linguist to teach you how to fill in your tax return, especially when in the UK, most of our tax is pay as you earn anyway, and you only actually have to fill in a tax return if you are self employed in any capacity, which most people are not. So that's a talking point, I think, that's been brought over from the US, where they all have to file their own tax returns, and it's kind of become part of the UK parlance, um, even though it's not really relevant to us. That stuff can be learned at home, but school is a good opportunity for you to learn these kind of little life skills that often get ignored or forgotten. That was a bit of a tangent, wasn't it, this morning? That had absolutely nothing to do with celebrating difference, which is why we are here to chat today. So let's take a minute to listen to Joe with the news. I can recenter myself back on topic, and we can have a chat about how we make sure that all of our children are included in festivities at this time of year.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, Bet UK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
Hey teachers, it's Tom here from Teachers Talk Radio, just dropping in to tell you about Teachers Talk Connect 2026. We are back with our amazing big annual CPD and networking extravaganza in Manchester. It's on Saturday the 14th of March and tickets are completely free for teachers. Just head over to ttradio.org/connect 2026 to grab your ticket today. We can't wait to see you there.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Schools Week says the government must decide whether to cut teacher numbers and close schools or increase per pupil funding as the number of children entering the system declines. The report comes following analysis by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which says the number of children under 16 in England is due to decline by 6% over the next decade. The think tank says the government has so far chosen to protect total school spending in real terms up to 2029, but it points out that policymakers will need to decide whether this remains the right judgment as pupil numbers continue to fall. The IFS report found that during previous historic reductions in pupil numbers, policymakers made what it calls different choices. For example, when pupil numbers fell in the 1970s and 80s, there were cuts to teacher numbers. In the 2000s, when pupil numbers declined, there were actually increases in the number of teachers. A researcher for the IFS said that whilst closing a school can be problematic for local communities, maintaining school numbers as they are might not be the best for pupils either, as some schools might struggle to offer a full breadth of curriculum. The TES magazine says that teacher recruitment is turning a corner and that positive ITT data should be welcomed by the sector after a decade of grim recruitment stats. The article says that this year's census shows just over 32,000 people starting initial teacher training, an 11% rise on last year. Crucially, 99% of the postgraduate target has been met, up from 69% the year before. Recruitment to STEM subjects has exceeded the target for the first time since targets were introduced in 2019, with physics up 36%, computing up 44%, and maths up 16%. Across secondary subjects from art and design to PE have met or surpassed goals. Secondary recruitment overall still falls short of the overall target, but the direction of travel is positive. The article cites the role of financial incentive and says increased bursaries and the expansion of postgraduate teaching apprenticeships have widened access. Pay rises have also mattered. A better narrative about teaching is also emerging. Bridget Phillipson talks about it as a career alongside medicine, public leadership and social service, as work that shapes communities. Speaking positively about the profession, the data suggests, makes all the difference. Schools Week reports on a new legal duty that will be introduced for councils to notify schools when a child is placed in temporary accommodation. This was announced as part of the government's child poverty strategy. Statistics suggest that around 31% of children in the UK are living in relative poverty, with more than 172,000 children living in temporary accommodation in England. The notifications would go to health visitors and GPs alongside schools, which government says would help agencies provide extra support. For schools, this could be extra pastoral support, breakfast clubs, after-school activities and homework clubs. The long-term ambition of the strategy is to reduce the number of days lost at school for children living in temporary accommodation. For full details and union reaction, see Schools Week. LBC says family hubs across the country will have a dedicated SEND specialist. The Best Start hubs will offer a range of support to local communities, such as speech and language sessions for toddlers, specialist parent groups and baby groups. Councils are being asked to recruit the specialists for each of the 1,000 family hubs being rolled out from April next year. The Department for Education also announced councils will have to prioritise the neighbourhoods most in need for family hubs to access their share of £500 million being invested into the hubs. It has set an ambition for 70% of the hubs to be located in the most disadvantaged 30% of communities. Funding for SEND interventions in the hubs will be confirmed in due course and will be in addition to the £500 million for the hub rollout. More details on LBC online. Finally, in Scotland, the Daily Record reveals the country's top secondary schools, and there is a new winner. Douglas Academy was crowned top of the league with 91% of pupils leaving with 5 or more national fives, 81% with 5 or more Highers, and 34% with 2 or more advanced Highers. This is a 5-place rise since last year in the league table. One school is reported to have leapt an impressive 61 places up the table since last year. The 10 best schools for academic excellence are also listed, as well as other awards for Best Scottish Independent Secondary School. Full details on the Daily Record website. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Thank you, Joe. So, as I said at the top of the show, if you have listened to Saturday Breakfast for even 5 minutes in the past, you will know that this is my favourite time of year. And I love all of the different celebrations that we have, kind of as we work through mid-October to kind of the beginning of January, I suppose. But I also have to recognise that I'm very privileged in that way because I live in a country that broadly aligns with my own religious beliefs. England is a culturally Christian country, even if many people will kind of identify as atheist or as kind of nominally Christian without actually believing in God, in a higher power. Or maybe it's better to suggest that lots of people in England tend to believe in something, but lean towards not really knowing what that something is. And so that means that for me personally, the vast majority of festivals, of holy days are built into my my year as automatic times off. We get Christmas as a bank holiday. We get Good Friday as a bank holiday. Easter Monday is a holiday in lieu of Easter Sunday. There are a few that I celebrate that are not automatic days off just because of, my own flavor of religious beliefs. But that's okay, because I recognize that those holidays are not the kind of cultural standard, not necessarily the religious standard. And so if I want to celebrate those days, then I want to make sure that I personally do something about it. But I've been thinking this week quite a lot about the young people that we work with specifically, whose religious beliefs don't align with the country in which they are living, or the culture in which they are living, or as we will talk about kind of when I introduce the study that today's show is based on, where you have got true culturally, I just want to show off that I know the word pluralistic, I think, culturally pluralistic societies, where you do have a lot of cultures all kind of operating alongside each other. And then the country kind of has to pick what it is going to nominally be. And this show was kind of inspired by the 2018 TV special called Click and Collect. I don't know if anybody has seen it. I personally love it. It was a BBC thing with starring Asim Chowdhury and Stephen Merchant. And it's basically about these two blokes who are kind of on a bit of a mission to find this one particular toy that a child really desperately wants for Christmas. And in it, one of the main characters, Dev, he's Hindu, but he says kind of in dialogue, just as a throwaway comment, he says, "Oh, I love Christmas. It's like Diwali but with turkey." And I thought that was, I think that's a lovely line. And I think that's a really good way of seeing how different cultures, different religions can kind of operate alongside each other, about how you can celebrate something in a secular manner, in the same way that Christmas is kind of very much a secular holiday within England. Although, again, I've got to recognize my privilege in being a Christian and saying that Christmas is a secular holiday, because I'm aware that not everybody of every religion will agree with me. And so, yeah, I thought that was a really nice way of kind of showing how religions and celebrations can operate side by side. But it got me thinking as well about the people who don't feel that way. It got me thinking about a child that I taught back in I think my third year of teaching, might have been my fourth. But he was a Jehovah's Witness, the only Jehovah's Witness child that I've ever taught. And Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, they don't celebrate Christmas at all. They don't celebrate birthdays. And so all of those kind of cultural touchstones, particularly in a primary school, which is, where I was teaching at the time, he couldn't really take part in. So, when the other children would bring in a cake, or I would bring in a cake for their birthdays, that wasn't something that happened on his. When we were preparing for the Christmas play, I had to make sure that he had something else to do. And, we made sure that at every point he was happy, his parents were happy, that, he didn't feel left out. So, he didn't get a cake for his birthday, but I did make sure that we had a cake for him on just I think it was some random dreary Tuesday in February. just to make sure that he wasn't kind of missing out on something that everybody else had. And that was kind of one end of the spectrum, I suppose. I then had, a couple of years ago, a Muslim child in my class, in my Year 7 French class. And in Islam, you also cannot celebrate Christmas. That is considered, for most Muslims, that's considered haram. And again, different people, individuals, will be at different places on the scale of whether they can learn about Christmas and kind of all of the celebrations that go alongside with it, kind of as an intellectual exercise, or whether they don't participate in that either. And again, I had conversations with that child, with the family, about whether she wanted to be present for the lessons that I was doing about how the French celebrate Christmas, because France is a culturally Catholic country. and there are lots of interesting things therein to learn about. And I think it's really important, particularly now where it can be quite frightening to talk about multiculturalism, because we are seeing a rise in far right nationalism. We are seeing a rise in conversations that kind of go along the lines of, oh, well, if you don't like it, go back to where you came from. And somebody will turn around and say, you know what, Cardiff? I'm from Edinburgh, mate, come on. And we do, I think, forget that being English, you know, in my context, because I'm in England, being English isn't the same as being white. It isn't the same as being Christian. It's being born in England or going through the naturalization process, you know, getting your passport, getting your citizenship. And so while you can say, okay, well, England is a culturally, nominally, you know, however you want to phrase it, Christian country, therefore, it makes sense that a lot of our kind of mandatory time off is based around Christian festivals. We also have to acknowledge the fact that those are not everybody's festivals and think about how we can make sure that everybody feels included. Because particularly if you're working with very young children, you may already feel a sense of exclusion by not celebrating the same holidays as everybody else anyway, you know, not getting excited about Father Christmas because Father Christmas doesn't come to your house because you don't celebrate Christmas, you celebrate Yule instead. And then to be left out by what is going on in school because the school hasn't your teacher hasn't thought through how you're going to be included in those celebrations kind of adds to that othering, which right now is something that we absolutely don't want. If anything, this is a time of radical inclusivity, of fighting back against the kind of extreme, unpleasant nationalism that we are seeing by making an effort to ensure that everybody is feeling included. So that's kind of what I want to think about today. How we make sure that everybody feels included, how we make sure that that doesn't look like tokenism, and how we make sure that we are not being patronizing in our inclusivity by thinking, oh, poor Johnny, you don't celebrate Christmas, so let's just make a Christmas card and we can call it a winter card. And that's absolutely not the same thing at all. If you have any comments on today's show, please remember to keep it respectful. I don't actually think that we have any disrespectful people here in the Saturday Breakfast Show audience. Anybody that has been disrespectful in the past just gets an immediate block and we move on. So I think we've cultivated a really understanding, accepting audience here. But if you do have anything that you want to say on this morning's topic, there are a few ways that you can get in touch. You can text in, as Tim has already done this morning. If you are listening live via the Podbean app, you've got the little input your message box there within the app. Type your message into there. I will read it out live on there. We can have a chat that way. If you are listening to me live elsewhere, not via the Podbean app, then you can get in touch with me via Blue Sky. I am Mr. D. Lester. That's MRDLESTER. My Blue Sky is open in another window. I will read your message out on air and we can engage that way. You can also get in touch with me via Blue Sky if you are listening to this on playback. Because as I always say, the topics that I choose to talk about here on Saturday Breakfast are topics that I think are interesting and are worth talking about throughout the year, you know, and throughout the years. Because as we have seen in shows in the past, nothing in education tends to really change that much. So I'm sure this will still be a topic of conversation that we will need to have in 2026, in 2030, in 2040, in 2050, when I am hopefully getting a bit closer to retirement, although that's looking a bit doubtful. And when I am no longer here, I am sure it is something that the new host of Saturday Breakfast will need to pick up and talk about, so we can always chat about things. So today's show is based around a really cool study that I read that looked at a primary school in the Ungabang district of West Kalimantan. I hope that I have pronounced that correctly. My apologies if I haven't. And if you're sitting there laughing at me because you know how this is pronounced and I've got it terribly wrong, please do get in touch and correct me. Because as I've said before, names are incredibly important and I want to get them right. This specific school where this study took place has 420 pupils across a range of ethnic backgrounds. So we had, they had Malay, Dayak, Javanese, Batak, and Chinese ethnicities all represented within their school. And then within those ethnicities, there were a range of religions practiced. So they had children practicing Islam, Christianity, a specific Catholic group sort of within the group of other Christians, Confucianists, and atheists. And so, of course, this makes this school very naturally, very incredibly multicultural. I don't think I've ever taught in a school that has been as multicultural as that. And this is probably something else that actually I should recognize while we are talking about this. I live in a predominantly white British area. The vast majority of people in my town are white British. Most of the people who are not British are actually students at a local boarding school. And this is the area that I've always lived in. So kind of when I went to school, I only remember, I think there were 3 black children in my class at primary school, or in my year at primary school. And then I only remember 1 black person in my secondary school for the 5 years that I was there. That then changed when I went to sixth form in a kind of a bigger town. But that's kind of the context that I'm in. And so not only have I lived here my whole life, but I've taught here my whole career. So that's kind of the context that I'm coming from. Paul has texted in, good morning to you. I always love when Paul texts in. He gives me some really interesting things to think about. He says, our Catholic primary school has a small number of Muslim children. They attend each assembly and singing session, and this was made clear when they joined the school. There is a respect both ways between school and family. And I do think that's a really important point. In fact, I think that's 2 really important points. The first is, and particularly in a primary context, to recognize that a lot of primary schools in England are, even if it's only nominally, faith schools. So a lot of schools, primary schools in England, will be Catholic or Church of England schools, and the diocese will be involved. There are also primary schools that run within other faiths. And I think, if you have a very strong, very specific faith belief and you want your child educated within that belief, then you probably would do your best to make sure that you are in the catchment of that school. So if, for example, you are a strongly Catholic family and you want your child to attend a Catholic primary school, as Paul has discussed, then you are going to make sure that you are in that catchment area. And we've all heard stories of people who have moved house, who have had children baptized, specifically in the run up to going to school, so that they can go to a specific school. And that just is part of how the English education system has evolved. You know, the Church of England specifically, but also the Catholic Church, was very instrumental in setting up schools as they currently exist, and we kind of have the residues of that now. And again, this is another kind of privilege that I have to recognize. I mean, very millennial this morning, I recognizing all my privileges. I'm not a parent, and so I kind of speak on this only from a teacher's point of view. I think it is important that if you are sending your child to a school, you recognize that that is a choice that you have made. And so you kind of have to an extent, respect the culture of that school. Because, and again, I'm aware that what I'm about to say may be a little bit controversial, so I am hesitant, but I'm going to say it anyway. Sending a child to school at all, or to a specific school, is a choice. In England, we have relative freedom of where we send our children. You must be within the catchment area, but again, we know of parents who move so that they can be within catchment areas of specific schools. You do also have the choice to home educate, and even though that may not be practical for many families, it is a choice that you have. So when you choose to send a child to a specific school, you are kind of, as the parent, making the choice to send them there. And so it's important to respect that there are certain things that have to be done. It's also important, particularly in a primary context, to recognize that there are certain things that legally have to be done. So collective worship is a legal requirement in school, and that worship legally must be of broadly Christian character. I have been in schools where children of specific faith groups have opted out of going to collective worship. They would go to the assemblies and they would maybe not sing the hymn that went with the assembly, but they opted out of the worship. And so they either had worship of their own, if there was a member of staff of that faith group qualified to lead that kind of worship, or they would do something collectively, you know, in the library, in the IT room with another member of staff. But it's one of the interesting things about having an education system where the church, the state religion, if you like, is very much ingrained into the bedrock of it. But there are choices. And I think, again, particularly with very young children, they are curious, they are interested. Young children tend to love culture more than any other group of people. Young children love learning about different cultures, about different types of people. It's why kind of humanities at primary level is such a joy to teach, because they love learning about the Egyptians and the Romans and the Greeks, the Vikings. You know, they love different groups and having different experiences. And so I think if given the choice, a lot of children would choose to observe the collective worship. But it is then also important for the school to recognize if parents have very specific religious beliefs that prohibit that, in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, and kind of work with the family in order to make that work, in order to make life better for everybody. Paul is texted again. We moved house to help our daughter go to a different school. Best decision we could make. The school she would have gone to was EYFS to Year 11 Academy, which I was against. Interesting. So as someone who has taught EYFS to Year 13, I like that range of experience, but I think I agree with you that having a right through EYFS to Year 11, particularly in an academy, which suggests to me that they are probably all on the same site or a very close split site, I don't think I like that, because I do think that primary education needs to feel like primary education. I feel like, you need the bright colors, you need the lovely displays, you need the things that the year 11s would feel were quite babyish. And you don't want to not have those things just to keep your year 11s on board, but you also don't want to alienate your year 11s by having it feel too primary. All pupils shared a lunchtime and a cafeteria. See, I remember, for example, I went to a separate, like, we called it infant and junior school. So I went to infant school, which was reception to year 2, and then junior school, which was year 3 to year 6. And I remember being in year 3, so 8 years old, and being scared of the year 6s who were 11. I can't imagine being maybe not a 4-year-old, because 4-year-olds are fearless, but maybe a 5 or 6-year-old, and finding myself sitting next to a 16-year-old at lunch. I think, yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Something for me to think about this afternoon. Thank you, Paul. So yeah, within this school, then, in West Kalimantan, we have got this huge range of faith, of culture, of ethnicity. And the school had to figure out how they were going to celebrate that. And I think that's a really important way to frame it. Because I could have sat here and said the school was figuring out how they were going to juggle that, how they were going to relieve any tensions between ethnic groups, for example, or between religious groups. But this school chose not to think about it in terms of juggling or in terms of tensions, but in terms of how they could celebrate the differences. And it's not about hiding those differences. It's not about pretending those differences don't exist. And I think, again, for some of us, that can be a difficult thing to remember. So I grew up going through the kind of 90s, the early 2000s, again, in a predominantly white area. So I'm going to caveat what I'm about to say with that. But I grew up being taught that we should attempt to be race blind, and that we shouldn't see color because all people are people. We now know, or the current thinking is, that was actually the wrong way to perceive it, because your race, your nationality, your ethnicity informs a big part of who you are. So we shouldn't attempt to ignore that, but we also shouldn't use it as something that is divisive. We should be using it as something to celebrate, as something to learn about, as something that brings us all together. And again, that's what this school was attempting to do. So for the next half hour or so, we're going to have a look at what this school did practically in order to kind of make sure that all of its pupils felt like they were being celebrated, that their heritage was being celebrated, and what the outcomes of that celebration were, and how that impacted the pupils as they moved through their education. So the first thing that this school did was they looked at different cultural activities as multicultural practice. So the study that I'm referring to highlighted this idea that cultural activities are one of a school's most effective tools for internalizing multicultural values. The study is important to point out that this is not done as a passive display, so it's not just our multicultural school board in the reception area, which then is ignored the whole rest of the way throughout the school. It's It's active participation in what is going on within this school, in what the teachers are expecting, in what the children are expecting and expected to do. And they had some really nice ideas that I think would be really interesting to adapt into a school. Now, obviously, for me, this isn't going to work because I teach in an online context. So a lot of these things that are about like clothing and food and stuff really wouldn't make that much of a difference. But for those of you that are teaching in person, there might be some things that you can adapt. So the first thing that they did was engaging in the local Robo tradition. Now, this is a coastal Malay ritual which symbolized gratitude and communal harmony. And what they did was they had all of the children observe that tradition, participate in the ritual together, so that they weren't just watching and learning. It wasn't a YouTube video, this is what Robo is about. They were actually participating in the ritual. They understood what it was to perform the ritual, and they understood why the people who performed it regularly did so. One teacher in the study said that doing that helped to students, quote, understand and appreciate cultural diversity, end quote, which in turn echoes findings that cultural participation fosters tolerance and reduces prejudice. We do have to be very careful if we are expecting our young people to participate in different kinds of practice. We've got to be careful that we are choosing open traditions and not closed traditions. So there are some religions that say certain practices should not be performed by people outside of that religious tradition. I'm thinking of Native American smudging, for example. So there are quite a few Native American religions that will use sage smudging. So you light bundles of sage on fire and you use the smoke to cleanse an area of evil spirits, of evil energy. And those are closed traditions. So people who are not from those specific Native American tribes shouldn't take part in them. But there are also lots of open traditions that you can take part in. And there are lots of non-religious traditions that come from a culture that you can take part in. If, for example, this school had a large English population and they chose to celebrate English heritage by having a roast dinner, a traditional Sunday chicken, potatoes, Yorkshire puddings, not gravy because gravy is disgusting, swede, runner beans, whatever it is that you think should go on a full English roast. That I don't think would be problematic, because that would be sharing food, that would be engaging in a ritual. Sitting down to Sunday lunch is an English ritual, but it doesn't have a specific a specific religious bent to it. It's just a case of sitting down and sharing a meal together. You might want to, if, for example, you are studying Judaism and you have your children sit down to a Shabbos meal, you might want to check whether that is appropriate. You might want to talk to rabbis, to members of the Jewish community, to see whether that is appropriate for you to do, or whether there are other ways that you can celebrate it. But by bringing your children into rituals that don't necessarily have a spiritual religious meaning, but are purely cultural, you can foster that cultural understanding. You can get them on board in a way that you can't do just by, again, watching a YouTube video about it. This school, as you can probably tell by the multicultural makeup of its pupils, is in a very multicultural area. And there are lots of local arts festivals which celebrate the culture of the peoples around. And the schools would participate in those. So pupils would perform regional dances, sometimes from their own heritage and sometimes from cultures unfamiliar to them. And by doing this, they built confidence in their own identity whilst encouraging appreciation for difference. And the study emphasized that performing dances from other areas help children to recognize both similarities and differences between cultures, which helps to foster an inclusive mindset. So I talked about this on the show before, but my favorite PE in primary school was dance. And we did a lot of country dancing. We did country dancing in year 5. We did maypole dancing in year 3. Both of those are very traditional English types of dancing, which, as I've spoken about on the show quite recently, I have not taught ever as a teacher, and I've not seen taught in schools that I've worked in. Maypole dancing, country dancing seems to have come off of the curriculum now. But dance is another very cultural phenomenon that doesn't have to be rooted within religion. There can be religious aspects to dances. You know, if you go back far enough with the maypole, there is a pagan religion origin to it. But dancing doesn't have to be. Dancing can be cultural. Dancing can be traditional. I would love it if I went to a school and they had year 3 doing Morris dancing in PE. I think that would be amazing. And again, if you then have children from other cultures within your school, having all of the children learn their traditional dances helps to foster that multiculturalism. Even if you don't have children from other cultures within your school, having them participate in dances, having your 100% white British year 4 class perform a lion dance for Lunar New Year, which you have done in a respectful way that you have learnt from somebody who is trained in lion dance. You know, you're not just kind of copying again something that you've seen on TV, but you are participating, you are practicing fully in something that is cultural and not necessarily religious, can help to show that culture, all culture, is about having fun and enjoying yourself and expressing yourself. And you can then start to look at the links between your own traditional dances, your own traditional culture, and the traditions of other people, because you can look for those commonalities rather than emphasizing those differences. A lot of English towns will have had, we call them goodwill evenings, where I'm from, but we'll have had the kind of turning on the Christmas lights festivals, and schools are quite often involved in those. Primary school choirs, again, particularly, will go along and perform. And those are places where dances could be performed. And even though it is a switching on of Christmas lights, there would be nothing to say that a non-Christian dance couldn't be performed there. You know, you don't traditionally break out a maypole in December, but there's nothing really to say that you couldn't, in the same way that you might want to do a traditional Javanese dance, a traditional Malayan dance, whatever it might be. So looking for opportunities within the local community to not only engage in culture, but to have your young people acting as ambassadors for culture and teaching the adults in the community what it is to be involved, to be culturally aware, I think is a really good life lesson for all concerned.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, Bet UK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
The next thing that the school did, again, could be a controversial one, and so it would need to be handled quite sensitively in a school. But on Indonesian Independence Day and other national commemorations, all pupils within this school, regardless of their own ethnicity, their own ancestry, wore traditional Indonesian clothing. There is part of me that worries that could just become a dress-up day and could start to treat national clothing as a costume rather than as a source of culture. But national clothing does symbolize national identity, and that national identity can be broader than any one specific ethnic group. One class teacher whose class participated in this noted that pupils wearing traditional Indonesian clothes, even though they themselves may not be of Indonesian ethnicity, would quite often talk about how it gave them a feeling of belonging and a feeling of inclusion within the country that either they or their parents or their grandparents, however many generations down they may be, chose to make their home. And again, the other thing that it does is it reinforces to the Indonesian children, the natively Indonesian children, that their culture is also worth respecting. I think one of the reasons that we see this kind of far right latching onto the idea of national identity and cultural identity is because a lot of cultural signifiers feel like they are eroded when your culture is the norm. If somebody asked me what is traditional English dress, I'm not sure that I would necessarily be able to tell you. At the moment, it's probably pajamas, because if I look outside, invariably somebody is walking around in their pajamas. But the reason that I don't know is because I live in England, I am culturally English, and so whatever our national dress might be is, in my head, just the norm. I'm lucky enough, as a language teacher, as a culture teacher, to understand that my norm is not the same as everybody else's norm. My norm is not universal. But it's easy to understand how people might see their norm as the default. So then when you see other people celebrating their national dress, their national holidays, things that are not what you might consider the default, the norm, and you then look at your own culture and you can't see those things, it can be easy to understand why people might feel frustrated by that. Whereas if you do highlight that things which are considered to be the norm are in fact just part of your culture. So, for example, when I was in year 3, I considered maypole dancing to be quite normal. And I think it was important for me that my teachers pointed out that actually not everybody did maypole dancing. That was a very specifically English thing. I live in Gloucestershire and we have the cheese rolling. And so to me, and as I'm saying this, I realize how ridiculous it's going to sound. But to me, rolling a wheel of cheese down a hill and then chasing it, or trying to beat it to the bottom, is quite normal. But then I remember when a French friend of mine who now lives in the UK, went to the cheese rolling for the first time, and she thought it was the best thing ever because it was so different. And, it was through seeing her reaction to it that I realized it's not the norm. It's not a default. It's not something everybody does. It's part of my culture. And that is worth celebrating, but I don't have to denigrate. I don't have to look down on. I don't have to ban other people's cultures in order to celebrate my own. I just have to be aware that a lot of the things that I see on a day-to-day basis are my culture. They are not some kind of worldwide standard. And be mindful of that. Be aware of that. Be perpetually aware of that, so that I can see that, in fact, my culture is everywhere because I live within my culture. And so it's not a bad thing when somebody else is in England celebrating their own culture. It's not showing me that I don't have anything, because my culture is everywhere. My culture is all around me. So together, these things, taking part in non-religious traditions, participating in the local community, in local arts festivals, wearing traditional attire for national days, together they create this kind of practical curriculum of diversity, which helps pupils to embody values that, if it's just the teacher talking at the whiteboard about them, they might stay abstract, they might stay superficial. Up until now, we've kind of avoided what can be sticky situation of religious festivals and holidays and how we kind of approach those, but that is what inspired the show. And so it is important for us to turn our attention to what the article, what the research says about teaching, ingraining, embedding respect for other cultures. Now, in many countries around the world, schools avoid celebrating multiple religious holidays for fear of misunderstanding or causing offense. But this school within this paper took the complete opposite approach, and it used religious celebrations as opportunities for cross-cultural learning and empathy building. And within the study, I kind of went through and I did a bit of a thematic analysis of what the research was talking about. And I found that celebrating, marking different religious traditions clearly taught tolerance, empathy, and social responsibility. So in this school, the big celebrations that they celebrated, the big festivals that they celebrated, there we go, included Eid, Christmas, the Lunar New Year, Maulid, which is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's birthday, and all of their students, regardless of their own personal religion, participated in those things through creative contributions. So maybe they made cards, maybe they made decorations, they had art installations, they did collaborative displays. And what this did was transformed tolerance from a passive value, I won't disturb those people while they are celebrating Lunar New Year, into an active one. I see that this is fun for you. I see that you are getting a lot out of it, and I want to join you in that joy. And it's not about converting children. Let's just make that very, very clear. It's not about suggesting that one religious belief, tradition, festival is better than any other. It's just about making sure that all children feel involved. So, for example, during Ramadan, the school decorated its classrooms, and all children were involved in creating and hanging decorations. So the school didn't impose fasting. It didn't tell all of the children that they ought to be fasting through Ramadan. I mean, children don't fast during Ramadan anyway, but it didn't say that the children themselves had to celebrate Ramadan, had to mark Ramadan. It said that they should be involved in the joy of it, in the decoration, in the crafty bits. Non-Christian students made Christmas ornaments, which again were put up on display. Maybe the Christian children then hung them up on the Christmas tree in the corner of the classroom, but everybody was involved in the paper crafting. And during Lunar New Year, all students learnt a variety of Chinese greetings. This is something that I used to do as a Chinese teacher. And they were then encouraged to speak with their Chinese classmates in Chinese and wish them a happy new year. And the focus within this school was on actively appreciating difference rather than just passively accepting that people were different. And it was about focusing on the joy of celebration rather than on what the specific celebration was celebrating. In terms of empathy, lots of studies on development of empathy demonstrate that when children step imaginatively into someone else's culture, they develop empathy for them. The power of imagination is unparalleled, and the power of imagination within children is incredible. It's why learning through play in EYFS Key Stage 1 is so important, because through imagination, children can construct entire worlds where they learn, as we discussed at the top of the show, to safely interact with people, safely take risks, and safely figure out what consequences might be. So when a child, for example, makes a Christmas card, they learn much more than art skills. They understand the importance of festivity. They understand the symbolism on the cards. They understand emotional meaning. And I think Christmas cards are a really good example of how culture and language are linked but are not exclusive, because you can be in a culture that is very different to yours, even though the country has your same first language. I'm thinking specifically of the difference between England and the US right now, where on English Christmas cards, you might find a robin, and British robins are little fat balls of joy. I know that not everybody likes robins. I know that lots of people say that robins can be quite violent, but I like them. They are grey. They have got red chests, and they are brilliant. My grandfather used to make a big thing when the robins would start to be seen around Christmas time and tell me that that they were there on behalf of Father Christmas, keeping an eye, making sure that I was being a good boy. And so for me, robins have always felt very festive, very, very Christmassy, very, very special, very personal. But in the US, that role, even down to, oh, this bird is spying on you on behalf of Santa, that role is played by the cardinal, which is a bird that I don't think, I'm not an ornithologist, but I don't think we have cardinals in the UK. And as far as I can see, the reason that the robin is replaced in the US is because American robins look quite different to ours. And so we've got the same symbolic function of a bird being a representation of Christmas and, being a way to bribe children into being well behaved during a very exciting time of year. But the bird itself is very different, despite the fact that the two cultures superficially look very similar and they share a first language. So you can learn a lot about a culture by looking at the symbolism that they use on greetings cards for special occasions, and by doing some comparative symbology, I suppose, and figuring out where the differences are, where the similarities are, and why those differences have come to be. During Eid, when Muslim children and Christian children were sharing snacks together in this school, they were experiencing hospitality as a cultural value. So again, it wasn't about making the Christian children celebrate Eid. It wasn't about attempting to convert those Christian children to Islam. It was about teaching them the cultural values of people that they share a country with, but also about the importance of hospitality, which is an incredibly important value for everybody and is in fact very important within Christianity itself. So you can look at where different religions, different faiths, different cultures have the same values and find ways to integrate those throughout your curriculum. The study emphasized that the pupils, when they were spoken to about what they were doing, found those moments fun. They didn't find them burdensome. They didn't find them preachy. They didn't find them annoying. They didn't find them patronizing. One non-Christian student said that they liked Christmas because we make greeting cards and we exchange gifts. During Eid, we also bring in cakes and drinks to eat together. So in this case, empathy was being created, empathy was being shared as a lived experience, not as a moral instruction, with no expectation that the children would actually celebrate those festivals that they were taking part in. They were just learning about them. Then finally, we had that social responsibility. And that's the idea that you build community through shared rituals. So after Eid, pupils and teachers participated in this mass handshake and kind of forgiveness, where they would go around, they would meet with other people within the school, they would shake their hands, and they would forgive any wrongdoing that had happened over the year. And that taught all of those pupils collective responsibility for maintaining harmony, that we all have a responsibility to each other to make things nice within our community. And the idea therein was that community isn't automatic. Community isn't natural. It doesn't just spontaneously arise. It is built intentionally through communication and through ritual. So by embedding these religious holidays into that process, the school was positioning their pupils as co-creators of social harmony. They were positioning the pupils as saying, yes, your celebration is as important to you as my celebration is to me, and I'm going to do what I can to make that celebration really nice for you. And I think that that's quite sophisticated. That's very sophisticated, a very sophisticated concept for the children to articulate. And again, I think if you were just the teacher standing at the front of the classroom saying that, it would seem very theoretical, it would seem very abstract. But through actively experiencing it, through actively embedding it, it becomes a lot more obvious, it becomes a lot clearer to those young people.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, BetUK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
So, as a religion, culture, language enthusiast, I think it's really important that the children have in this school have learnt about different traditions, learnt about different celebrations. But I understand that that is not everybody's interest. I understand that not everybody thinks that that is as important as I do. So we're going to spend the last few minutes of today's show looking at the values education that came out of this, looking at what children learnt outside of the theory of, this is what these holidays are about. So the first big thing that the children seemed to take away from this celebration of each other's rituals is that their friendships didn't need to follow ethnic or religious lines. So the children, before this study took place, they tended to form friendship groups within their same ethnicity, within their same religious group, within their same language, because that's a very easy commonality. We see that quite a lot where you have diaspora communities, where you have immigrant communities, because you have those shared values. If you have just moved somewhere and it's very different, it's very new, sticking to people who have the same language as you, the same cultural background as you, even if you have nothing else in common, provides a kind of safety net. But after this study, once kind of all of the celebrations have been celebrated, teachers saw that friendship groups were changing and that they no longer chose their friends, like I said, based on sameness. And this is significant because it suggests that social grouping in childhood often reveals latent bias. And so what they were then doing by having experienced each other's festivals, realizing their similarities, they were then looking to choose their friends on other values. You're always going to be biased when you're choosing your friends. You're always going to prefer some people over others. And there are going to be a range of different reasons why you might prefer one person to somebody else, why you might like one person but not like somebody else. But you can kind of remove that cultural element to it by revealing the sameness of culture and by celebrating the difference of culture. Children were increasingly open to discussing difference. They were shown to ask better, more sincere questions about other cultures or about other religions without fear of being judged and without judging other people. I think that we were wrong in the 90s and the early 2000s to attempt to be race blind. I think we did it in good faith. I think we thought we were doing the right thing. But I think that ultimately, because culture is so important to people, because heritage, language are so important to people, it is important. How many times can a man say important in one sentence? It is important for us to be able to ask questions, to learn in good faith about what other people are celebrating and why, so that we can share in that humanity, we can share in that importance with them. When children are beginning to articulate curiosity respectfully, that's an indication of a healthy multicultural climate. If only more adults could articulate curiosity respectfully instead of setting up straw man arguments or participating in some kind of concern trolling or making it look like they were asking a question in good faith when in fact they were just setting up some kind of row. These children demonstrated a very clear, very visible strengthening of togetherness. They described these celebrations of moments of joy as moments of unity. So sharing food, sharing greetings, collaborative decorating, strengthened emotional bonds, and created what this study refers to as a sense of family. I don't like it when schools say, "Oh, we're all a big family here," because I think any place that uses that terminology is just looking to kind of exploit the workers. Um, but, you know, if you are creating a place where everybody is tolerant, where everybody is respectful, where even if you don't get on with somebody in your class on a personal level, you are respectful of their humanity, of them as a person, I suppose that is like being a family, isn't it? And that is a very early sense of social cohesion. If you can get a class of children to be socially cohesive and to learn how to operate together, you are training adults who can be socially cohesive, who can operate together. And this is done not through instruction. It's not a teacher, again, having a circle time saying, "Oh, I heard that we all had a falling out at playtime. We need to make sure that we are being kind to each other." It's practiced, it's created, it's deliberate. Children are people, and children are learning lessons that they will take into the adult world. And if we want to create a generation of adults who are accepting of each other, accepting of differences, we need to make sure that they can celebrate difference. And we need to make sure that they can celebrate their own culture, they can celebrate their own beliefs without thinking that that needs to take away from somebody else, and without feeling that somebody else celebrating their culture takes away from them. Now, this school was clearly very fortunate in that the parents were on board. So the parents of all of the children who participated didn't mind their children participating in multicultural events, in other religious celebrations. I understand that that's not the reality for everybody, because again, I understand that there are some religious traditions that prohibit this. And so it can be difficult. But as we saw when we talked about Robo Robo, when we talked about local arts festivals, not all culture is religious. Not all traditions are religious. So if you can look for a wintertime tradition that has got nothing to do with Christmas, if you can look for a play that is being put on rather than a pantomime, if you can look for a local art gallery that is putting on a show of winter photography that, again, is not about Christmas, it's just about lovely little robins hopping around on fences. That's culture that all children can take part in, regardless of their own religious beliefs and traditions. So I leave you today, hopefully, with an understanding that children are a lot more tolerant than adults. Children like joy more than adults seem to like joy. And I actually think that as the adults in the room, we can learn a lot from children and from their willingness to kind of be happy and be joyful and celebrate. I hope you've enjoyed today's show as much as I enjoyed doing the research, as much as I enjoyed looking into it. Talking about multiculturalism, particularly in the modern climate, is quite worrisome. But I think if we don't have these conversations, if we don't keep multiculturalism at the forefront of our thinking, of our teaching, then we're actually not going to do anything to combat the negative nationalism that is kind of sweeping countries, that is making headlines at the moment. And I think for those of us who believe in multiculturalism, who believe in the importance of celebrating humanity, of everybody's humanity, we kind of have a social responsibility to have these conversations and to keep them going. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to both Tim and Paul, who texted in today, who engaged with the conversation. Stay tuned for Michael, who is coming up at 2:30 over on our live streaming, video streaming places. So over on YouTube, over on LinkedIn, over on X, formerly Twitter. He always has some really interesting things to say, particularly about arts education. So his show is coming up at 2:30. If I don't speak to you in the week, I hope you have yourselves a great week, and I will see you for breakfast next Saturday. It will be our last breakfast before Christmas. So bring something festive along with you. Bring a mince pie, bring some eggnog, bring a cocoa, whatever it is that you might want to have. And I will see you next Saturday. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.